Dr. Robin Niblett, Guy, ladies and gentlemen. Liberal International has spent the best part of 2016 writing a new liberal manifesto for the 21st century. Our member parties, like our founding fathers at Oxford University in 1947, are preparing a bold, striking answer to illiberal, authoritative strongmen the world over. We count on inspired statesmen like Guy Verhofstadt to take our message of freedom far and wide. Guy Verhofstadt leaves no one indifferent. He is known for asking tough questions and raising uncomfortable issues. But his issues are always issues that project the human spirit towards more freedom. Freedom of speech, political freedoms, economic freedoms, freedom to live in a society that merges respect, empathy, and solidarity for those left behind with freedom of opportunity for all, a society that abhors discrimination. His life path is one of growth. Growth from the youth of his political party to the highest political office of Prime Minister of Belgium. Growth from his Flemish roots to the four corners of the world and beyond. Growth from his country's politics to the politics of all liberal members of the European Parliament as president of the ALDE Group. His passion has inspired me many times. In his latest book, Europe's Last Chance, by the way, it's ready for you to purchase or to get at the nearest library, he is conscious of the challenges that Brexit poses for Europe. But like Winston Churchill and many others who added their voice to a desire to unite Europe after the horrors of World War II, he also sees the opportunities, the chance to create a continent united in the values of freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, in the vortex of instant news, tweets, and falsehoods that populate our information age, in the context of progressive erosion of international norms, as Alexander Cooley has argued, and in a world where populists call for the rise of illiberal regimes, as recently praised by the Prime Minister of Hungary, appealing to emotion rather than reason, loud, clear, principled voices like Guy's are not only needed, but indispensable. Some of you here in the audience today might be wary of what he has to say, him being the principal negotiator of the EU Parliament on Brexit. I don't know, frankly, where his lecture will lift our spirits today, but wherever he goes in his able oratory, he always does out of a deep love for Europe, the Europe that the UK embodied so well when it held strong for civilization against regimes of oppression in World War II. The Europe that he advocates is the Europe that goes beyond trade and currency and that appeals to the better angels of who we are as a culture, as peoples united by history and geography in a common destiny from the Atlantic to the Ural Mountains. As president of Liberal International, the World Federation of Liberal and Democratic Parties, a truly global organization with a membership of more than 100 parties and organizations across more than 80 nations, I must always look beyond Europe. But without a strong Europe in our world, firm in its liberal democratic values, authoritarian regimes will claim the better model. I am very honored and proud to present today in the Liberal International series of Isaiah Berlin lectures held again here at Chatham House, our lecturer, politician, writer, thinker, negotiator, MEP, and most important, Vice President of Liberal International, Guy Verhofstadt.
Obviously, I'm not Guy Verhofstadt. I could give the speech, though, and we could see where it goes. But I just wanted to add my words, very short words of welcome to Guy Verhofstadt. Delighted to have you here. And to Julie Minovis, Dr. Minovis, and all of your colleagues here. We're very pleased that our Chatham House members would have this opportunity to hear your remarks, Mr. Verhofstadt, to be able to pose some questions. I think everyone here is aware that the European Parliament plays an increasingly important role in the European Union, and in particular in this negotiation. There may be 27 other member states who will need to approve this exit deal, but the European Parliament will try and speak with one voice on it, which will give it a pretty important role. So I think you can see here with this audience, this is on the record, obviously. It's also live streamed, so I'd like to welcome our members who are not here in the room to this meeting, and we will have a chance to have questions and a discussion with you after your remarks. So welcome to Chatham House. Delighted to have you here.
Thank you. So thank you very much. First of all, my thanks to Liberal International for the opportunity to have this lecture here this morning. Thank you also to Chatham House to host this meeting. Nevertheless, I was a little bit depressed when I entered here in the room because I had asked that, or ordered in the US, I have an American editor, Perseus Group, with the brand Basic Books. So I ordered a number of copies to sell them here. And what is happening, there is not only a Muslim ban to go inside the US, apparently there is also a pro-European publication ban that these copies never arrived from the US here. So, and that's unfortunately, so that's my only copy, and I'm going to take it with me now at the end of my intervention. But it gives me the opportunity to launch this book in London, this lecture. This book, Europe's Last Chance, appears as, in my opinion, the European Union is under serious threat. Under serious threat, in fact, from 3 fronts, from 3 sides. First of all, and we know it all, a radicalized political Islam who is responsible for a number of attacks on European soil. And that started already in 2004, you remember, Madrid, 2005, London. And then came Paris, Brussels, Berlin. The second front and the second threat is certainly Vladimir Putin, who is trying to undermine the European Union from inside with cyber attacks, also financing, as we all know, anti-European far-right political parties. Wilders in the Netherlands, Le Pen, with one or other loan and credit in France. And I have to tell you, I come back from the US, and my impression is that we have a third front for the moment, undermining the European Union, and it is Donald Trump, who have joined them across the Atlantic. As you know, and you have it seen yourself, Trump spoke very favorably of the fact that also other countries will want to break away from the European Union, and that he hoped for a disintegration of the European Union. Certainly based on the enormous influence of his chief political advisor, Mr. Bannon. Steve Bannon is unmistaken. He sent people now to Berlin, to Paris, to prepare the ground for similar referenda as Brexit. And I just came back from that book tour in the United States, and I can tell you that every European that I met there had only one conclusion, that is that the European Union has fewer friends than ever in the United States today. So this book tells you 3 things, and that's the reason why I wrote it. First of all, why a disintegration of the Union could happen. And the second is why a disintegration of the Union would be a disaster if it happens. Not only for Europe, but also, I think, for all our allies and for the world. And third element, how to avoid it, this disintegration of the Union. And that brings me by the first question. Why is Europe in crisis? Because, let's be honest, it's completely ridiculous to ignore that there are problems with the European Union. If you read my book, you're going to say, oh, what a Eurosceptic book it is. It is maybe more Eurosceptic than most of the Eurosceptic publications that have been published the last years, but I recognize that Europe is in what I call a polycrisis. Not one crisis, but multiple crises. There is a crisis of migration, there's a crisis of internal security, the terrorist attacks, there is a crisis of geopolitical weakness of Europe in our neighborhood, Ukraine, Syria, and there is also economically the bad results, certainly in the south of the European Union. We're still not recovered from the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. And the best description that you can have from the European Union for the moment is that it always acts too little, too late. And the best way to illustrate that this firm analysis of the European Union is simply to compare for one moment the way the United States reacted to the financial crisis and the way Europe, the European Union, reacted to the financial crisis. What you see in the US was in 9 months, Republicans and Democrats together, because it started with the Republican administration and then came only after a few months the Obama administration, well, in 9 months they were capable to do 3 things. A rocket, I should say, with 3 stages. TARP, Troubled Asset Relief Program, $400 billion to clean up the banks immediately. And I have to tell you, these dollars have been paid back in the meanwhile. The last dollar of the taxpayer that was injected in the insurance companies and the bank sector in America has been paid back on the 1st of January 2014. Already more or less 3 years from now. So they launched TARP, $400 billion to clean up the banks. Then came immediately an investment program of $900 billion for a period of 2009-2019, so it's still in place. And then third stage of the rocket, quantitative easing by the Federal Reserve Board for an astonishing amount of $1.2 trillion. That the Americans did in 9 months. And then you have to compare that to the European Union. What we did since the outbreak of the financial crisis. Mainly we got a discussion, a debate, still ongoing, between those who are saying, no, we need more austerity, Ferguson, or no, we need more growth, Krugman. That's the way we are dealing with the financial crisis. And the problem is that when you have 2 opinions in the European Union, nothing is happening at all, because it's an intergovernmental system in which the European Council has in fact the main power in their hands. And if half of the colleagues in the European Council thinks that they need to follow Ferguson, and half of them think they need to follow Krugman, nothing is happening for the moment. And on top of that, besides this, I should say, ideological discussion between austerity and growth, we created a half-finished banking union, and I say a half-finished banking union because in the meanwhile we have still not the necessary recovery fund, saving fund, if one or other big bank in Europe is collapsing. We have a small investment program of 300 billion euro, 1/3 of the American investment program of $900 billion. And we did also quantitative easing, that's true, but quantitative easing at the end, now, at this moment, to avoid deflation as a defensive measure, not in an offensive way as the Americans did in the beginning of the outbreak of the financial crisis. So that is the comparison you make. And you have to ask yourself, very honestly, not here alone in Chatham House, but I should say in all the capitals of the European Union, of the 28, how this is possible. How it is possible that the Americans can react in 9 months with 2 different administrations, that they can roll out this program in a short time period, and we are still discussing. Well, the reason is that we have not adequate political institutions in the European Union to react to a crisis of the magnitude as the financial crisis we have seen in 2008, 2009. Mainly the European Union doesn't exist. They tell you here in Britain maybe that it exists, but in fact it doesn't exist. What exists is a loose confederation of 28 member states still based on the unanimity rule. The unanimity rule, a Luxembourg compromise, a solution that was found to overcome the blocking attitude of Charles de Gaulle, and who is mainly saying that when the interest is at stake of one of the member states, they can use a veto against whatever decision that is taken on the European level. So we have, in fact, no union. We have a council, an intergovernmental method where the 28 heads of states and government have to agree before anything can happen. And we all know that institutions are key. I know it's far difficult as a politician to talk about institutions because people are saying, no, it's not about institutions, it's about policies. No, it are institutions who are responsible for policies. If you have bad institutions, you will have bad results. And it's not in my book. Nevertheless, I have referred a few times in it. There is a fantastic book that have been published 2 years ago, 3 years ago that I like a lot. That is a book of Robinson and Akemoglu, Why Nations Fail. And it's a book that's very interesting for a politician because the main point in the book is it's about politics, stupid. So that's an interesting opinion for a politician. And what they are mainly saying in this book is that if you have not the rule of law, not good property rights, not a democratic system, not applying democracy in all its forms, you will have bad economic results. And they give the example of Nogales, a little town on the border between the United States of America and Mexico. In the north, they are 5 times richer than in the south. And they are the same families, they have the same disease, they eat the same food, in fact, Mexican food, naturally. But the difference is that in the north, they are 5 times richer than in the south, because in the north there are good institutions, and in the south there is corruption, there is not rule of law, there is a lack of democracy, and so on. There are other examples, and North Korea, South Korea is maybe a more evident example of this. While this is also applying to the European Union. If you don't have the right institutions in place, if you continue to be a loose confederation of member states still based on the unanimity rule, you will never be capable to act at the right moment, and you can disappear, as disappeared in the past also nations who have based their political thinking and their decision making on unanimity. I'm always saying, and it was a fantastic tour in the US. Imagine one moment that the US should be governed like or 28 member states or European Union. How should it work? First of all, no Obama, no Trump. You could have 3 presidents, so that's the first change. Second change is it should be the 50 governors of the US coming together 5-6 times a year, who will decide on everything in the US based on the unanimity rule. Everybody should say, but that's nuts, that doesn't work at all. And then with the possibility for certain states to withdraw from the union or from the federation. For example, California is saying, well, this dollar, interesting currency, but I want to come back to the Spanish peseta, like in the middle of the 90s. That seems to be better. Or for example, another state like Florida is saying, American Border and Coast Guard, not with me. I do it myself. I take an opt-out, we call it, in Europe, from the Border and Coast Guard. Or, for example, Vermont or Washington or another state saying, the FBI, interesting organization, but not for me. I'm gonna not participate. That was created after the murder of President McKinley, as you know, in 1901, after a terrorist attack. And that murdered McKinley, and they create FBI, but not for me. I'm going to do an opt-out also. Maybe later on with an opt-in. You never know that I can change my mind. That's the way we are working in the European Union. I didn't do it in the American print, but I did do in the Dutch print. I put as an annex all the different European unions that exist today. In total, I have 12 maps, 12 in total. And I limited myself, I can tell you. The European Union of the single currency, the European Union of Schengen, the European Union of the justice and cooperation, the European Union of the European patent, as we have now, with only 26 member states participating, without Italy and without Spain. So such a European Union cannot work in the world of today. And in my opinion, and that is the main purpose of the book, we need a deep reform. And the Brexit is a golden opportunity, I should say, not only to discuss, to negotiate with our British partners, a new partnership between the European Union and Britain, but also to get or act together inside the European Union. For me, that second track is as important, if not more important, than the first track. And the building blocks to build up this European Union that is effective, that can act, that can work, that not a superstate where some people are talking about. When people are talking about the existing European superstate, I'm always thinking myself, what they are talking about. The superstate with a budget of 1% of the European GDP. 1%, that is the budget of the European Union. And from this 1%, 80% is in fact money paid by the member states going directly back to the member states. So the real budget of the superstate European Union is 0.2% of the European GDP. And from the 0.2% of the European GDP, you need 0.06% to pay your civil servants, to pay your agencies, to pay your institutions, to pay the pensions of all these people later on. And that means that the real room of maneuver of the so-called European superstate today is 0.14% of the European GDP. I'm always comparing that to the 23% of the American Federation. Or, for example, the 15% of the Swiss Confederation, to give only these two examples. But besides that, what is really needed is not new ideas. The ideas already exist since 1950, 1952, 53, when the 6 member states of the European Union, I should say the 6 member states of the steel and coal community, put together with their representatives a constitution, the 1953 constitution, in which they created the defense union, in which they created a political union, in which they did everything what was in fact necessary to have an effective union in this continent. And everybody knows why it failed. It was adopted by these 70 representatives with unanimity with 5 abstentions. Not a bad result in politics, I should say. But at the same time, it was defeated, as we all know. That's history today in the French National Assembly, because the new French Prime Minister, Pierre Mendès France, he didn't like the project. He liked the project, but it was a project of his predecessor. So he didn't engage a confidence vote in the French National Assembly to go forward with this project. And that is the reason why, because of this failure of the defense union, the vote in the French National Assembly, we didn't need then the political union, we didn't need the constitution, and the different representatives of the 6 member states came together somewhere in Sicily, and there was born then, and that was concluded in 1957, on the 25th of March in Rome, the so-called Treaty of Rome. And the Treaty of Rome is nothing more than, in fact, the beginning of a customs union. So at our universities, they tell us, and at our schools in Belgium and in other countries in Europe, they tell, Europe was a fantastic success. It started with the Second World War. Everybody was aware of the need to work together. Certainly Winston Churchill, who did the first attempts to go forward with such a united Europe. And then we created the European coal and steel community. And it went so well that gradually we have created and established the European Union as it stands today. That's the official version. The reality is completely different. It started with a failure from day one. And it is the negative vote in the French National Assembly, destroying, in fact, the first constitution for the European Union, based on a small European government, not the European Commission of 28 as we have now. We don't have even enough portfolios to give today to this 28, but a small government, 12, 15 people, and with 2 assemblies, one a European Parliament representing the citizens, one a Senate of the member states representing the member states, with a normal budget, with a normal treasury, with everything what is needed. So we don't need to reinvent everything. We know what is needed in the European Union. We have the building blocks. We know that we need a government for the single currency. It's only we Europeans who think that first of all you start with the currency and then you say, when you have started, oh shit, we need a treasury and we need maybe a government and a minister of finance and a common management of the debt. The Americans know that they only started with the dollar, not in 1785 when the Federation was created. In 1785 they created the Federation. Then there was the battle between Jefferson and Hamilton. And that created then these treasury certificates and the American treasury and so on and so on. And only later on, in the beginning of the 19th century, they started with the common currency. As I said, we are more intelligent. We do the opposite. The same for Schengen. We start with Schengen, and once Schengen is in place and everything, is pretty, find it a good idea, then we say, oh yeah, by the way, we need maybe a European border and coast guard. Is it not, in fact, more intelligent, first of all, to organize your management of the external border and then to abolish your internal, in fact, checks at the borders, as we have done years ago? We do it now with a budget of 250 million. That is the budget of the European Border and Coast Guard. I'm always comparing that with the $32 billion for Homeland Security, at least for these agencies in Homeland Security who are responsible for that. The same on the issue of the common fight against terrorism, intelligence sharing, investigation. You need capacities. I have enough of all these leaders in Europe who are always saying, but that's not necessary for Verhofstadt. No, we don't need that. That's Europe here. We need more coordination. That we need. The word coordination is every time used to not do what is necessary and to have not the intention to start, for example, with an investigation and intelligence capacity. The same for the defense union. I'm going to only, I know, I have already abused my time, but I continue a little bit still. If you invite a politician, you have to take the risk. So there's the deuce. So the defense union, why a defense union? Because we are spending, ladies and gentlemen, more or less 40%, 42% of the American military budget. And you could say that's not a lot, 42%. I can tell you it's a lot, 42% of the biggest American budget, the military budget in the United States of America. That's the input. Now the output. We are only capable to do 10 to 12% of the operations of the American army. So I'm a lawyer. I'm not a mathematician. Nevertheless, I was once Minister of Budget, but okay, that doesn't mean anything because the only thing what you need to know as Minister of Budget is the word no. So mathematics is absolutely not needed for that. So I don't know nothing about mathematics, but I know that if you spend 42%, and that is what you put in your military expenditures, and you can only do 12% of the operations of the American army, well, I think you are 3 times, at least, maybe 4 times less effective than them. And why? Because we duplicate everything in the European Union. Every country has his strategic air transport. Every country has its tactical battle groups. Every country has its medical services. And the numbers of cooperations between armies in Europe, there is a huge inflation. Everybody is cooperating with each other. Between the 3 Benelux countries, between France and Germany, between Italy and France, between the Baltic states, between the Scandinavian countries, but we are not capable to have real European battle groups when we need it, to have a number of operations in place. So also European Defense Union is key for that. And that's not against NATO, no. The European Defense Union needed to be, it's very simple, the European pillar, in fact, of NATO. And that was the initial idea. In 1953, that was in the Constitution, with the support of Winston Churchill, of the Brits, with the support of our American allies, because already at that moment they know that cooperation between the European armies is the best way to have some effective defense. And I want to conclude. I heard, and that's certainly also one of the questions that will be put forward, all this is okay, all this sounds very reasonable, but people are against it. People don't want it. People like more proper national government, national health service, national security, instead of this, call it European Union or European Federation, or whatever name you give. Well, that's wrong. People are very critical, that's true. People are very critical towards the European Union as it works today, or better, as it doesn't work today. They are very critical to every aspect of it, and they are right. It doesn't work. Not concerning the migration flows, not concerning the refugees, not concerning the fallout of the financial crisis, not geopolitically. But they are not against Europe. Every survey where we ask to the European citizens, do you think that Europe should do more, for example, to fight against terror? 82% of the citizens respond, yes, Europe needs to do that, but not the way they are doing it now. When you ask them the question, do we need more, for example, protection of external borders by Europe? The answer is 71% yes, but not the way it's working now, where there is in fact no management of the borders. And we let it all in the hands of the Italians and the Greeks, and we see what is happening later. The same is about migration, 74%, about the fight against unemployment, 77%, and even more than 60% for a common European defense union. On the 13 questions that are normally put for the European citizens on, do you believe that there is more European cooperation needed? And then there are 13 fields. On 12 of 13, there is a majority of the European citizens who want more common action, but not the action of today. Not a loose confederation that is always acting too little, too late. That is the reason why they fall into the trap of nationalist and populist, and that will certainly continue if we can put forward for them a vision, a project that can work and that gives the direction of what Europe needs in the world of tomorrow. A world of tomorrow who will be less secure, who will be more protectionist, and a world, in my opinion, in which the European Union has to defend its values, as we have seen now, for example, the last days with the Muslim ban coming from the other side of the Atlantic. The only thing what I want to say to end my intervention, President and ladies and gentlemen, is that I am astonished to see lots of people who say, well, national identity, nationalism is maybe a better basis to organize Europe in the future. I'm astonished by the levity with people are talking about nationalism and national identity in Europe. Forgetting what? Well, because we invented nationalism, that's for clear, in the 19th century in Europe. But apparently we have forgotten what disaster, what atrocities that so-called national identity thinking and nationalism has created in Europe. Because the problem is not national identity is itself, it's when national identity is based on ethnicity and not longer on values that the problems start in Europe. I think it's an enormous risk to think from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean that, again, we need to organize this old continent based on nationalism and national identity. 20 million people have died because of nationalism in Europe, because of the Shoah, ethnic cleansing, the pogroms. There is no one family living on the continent, and certainly also not in Britain, who has no grandfather, grandmother, member of the family who was not a victim of these stupidities and of these atrocities at the end of the 19th and the whole 20th century. So putting your political thinking and the future organization of Europe on nationalist idea is the most stupid thing what you can do. It's playing with fire. knowing what it had created in the past. And that's the main reason why I have written this book. Thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a good 25 minutes or so for discussion, some questions. A very powerful presentation, I must say, at the beginning as you were running through the elements of your poly crisis, Mr. Verhofstadt. I could see a lot of British Brexiteers nodding and saying, exactly. Yeah. But
I agree with them
on
that point.
Yeah. I think at the same time, have you said it might be a golden opportunity for the European Union? Brexit might be a golden opportunity to be able to tackle some of the challenges, the structural challenges that you described. And I thought your point about, we're taught in history that European integration has been this smooth progress from the coal and steel community through the European Union, through single currency. But your description, in fact, that it started with failure and is trying to catch up with the past, a pretty powerful statement to have made there. Dr. Manovis, I thought we agreed you might have one question or one point you wanted to make, because then I'm going to get the audience here in. But if you had one question or remark you wanted to make first.
Very fast. I was very happy to hear Guy Verhofstadt talk about this history of Europe, not as a streamlined history, but with its difficulties and at the beginning already. Now, and you talk about the role of France. You see, in school, I was told always, in my school, that it was the Franco-German alliance that built Europe, and that as long as that was strong, Europe would be strong. I would like to ask you, where is that now? Is there a Franco-German alliance at the core of Europe? Is that something that we can rely on in the future? Is it something that we should rely on?
I think it's key, a Franco-German alliance, but based on the right ideas, on the right vision. If it is to promote an intergovernmentalism in the future, I think it's not very helpful. But I have seen at least one candidate in the French election now. Maybe he did a very interesting op-ed in the FT a few days ago, Mr. Macron. And he said, what is not important is the sovereignty of France. What is important is the European sovereignty, because only by Europe we can regain our sovereignty. I think it's a fantastic thing for a Frenchman saying that. So I thought, no, because many people are always arguing to me and saying, yeah, but Verhofstadt, you're the only one. There is nobody else who thinks as you. So there is no ground for this idea. The opposite is true. There is a growing generation of young politicians in Europe. I spoke about Macron, but I could speak about the opposition movement in Poland of Nowoczesna, now at 25% in the polls, and behind these big pro-European rallies of 250,000 people at a certain moment in Poland. I can talk about Ciudadanos, Rivera, the new Spanish young leader, very pro-European. So it's not true that there is no counter-movement already born. The counter-movement on the continent of younger politicians believing in a radical reform of the European Union is there. Maybe they are not so strong for the moment as the nationalists are, the populists are, but there comes a day that they will be stronger than them, because it's the only way forward for the continent. And the fact that such politicians, also in France, have the courage, I should say to the public opinion in general, and doing it very well in the polls. So I don't hope that this is that my intervention and my support for him is now destroying his chances. So, but in any way, that is, we have to know that if today nationalism and populism has become the ordinary talk under politicians, the counter movement is already born and will be the fulfillment of the dream of the founding fathers of the 50s. There is no other chance. The other thing is, the other possibility is full further disintegration of the Union. Is the one or the other.
Right, I've got a question already at the front here. Please make sure you let us know who you are before the questions come in. First here, and I've got there and there. Yep.
Thank you, Tom Brake, the Liberal Democrat Foreign Affairs spokesman. So thank you very much, Guy, for coming to speak to us today. You may be aware that the doomsday clock is 2.5 minutes from midnight. So you need to get your books out in the bookshop soon.
Okay.
We are going to be debating the bill, the Article 50 bill, tomorrow, and that is how long it is. As a party, we will be pressing for people to have a vote on the terms of the deal, and I hope you might support us in that respect, and also pressing for the government to negotiate continued membership of the single market. So I'd be interested in your views on that. But perhaps most importantly, what role, if any, do you see for the United Kingdom in the future in the reforms that you have set out that you believe are necessary within the European Union?
Well, I think to start with your last remark, if there is a positive effect of Brexit, then it is, in my opinion, that it is an enormous wake-up call for the European leaders to get their act together. Nevertheless, I repeat what I have already said in the past. I deplore the Brexit decision. But okay, the decision has been made. A majority was there. And so we need to deal with this. And that means that we are looking for fair negotiations with the UK authorities. That's what we are trying to do. Not in the sense of, oh, it has to be a punishment, this has to be a revenge. On the contrary, it has to be, in fact, the search for a new partnership between the European Union, more integrated, more united as ever before, at the one hand, and our British friends at the other side. I see it that way. So, and we're gonna not interfere in what is happening inside the UK. You know my opinion about the Brexit. I think it was a wrong decision, but nevertheless, we have to deal with it. We cannot every time say, oh, okay, we're going to wait. No, it's going to be now to Theresa May to announce her proposal for a new partnership. It's not the European Union will tell, oh, we offer you this or that. It will be the British authorities who are going to say what type of relationship they want. And if I understand it very well, in the latest speech of the Prime Minister, she's going for a Brexit outside the Union, outside the single market, outside the customs union, outside the European Court of Justice system. And okay, that's their responsibility. What we're going to do in any way is to make a fair negotiation. That means that we shall not allow and we shall not accept what we call cherry picking. In saying, oh, we go out of all these policies, but by the way, oh, this European program, that seems interesting for us. Or that European policy, oh, that we want to continue. No, if you want that, you need also to take the liabilities, the obligations that are linked to that. Nobody of all taxpayers on the continent should accept another attitude from us. That said, I think also, and that's my personal opinion, what I'm expressing now, I hope also that I can put that in the resolution that I'm preparing for the moment for the European Parliament, and that will be approved by the beginning of April after the triggering of Article 50. We need also to be open and generous to the individual UK citizens. I can tell you, I receive every day tens of letters. It are now already, I don't know how many, I didn't summarize them. Every day I receive tens of millions of citizens who say, don't let us alone. We feel still European citizens. And we want to continue to have our link with Europe. because we make part of the same civilization. That is what we don't understand in Europe. That is, we have a common heritage, a common civilization, history, architecture, culture, literature, you name it. When people are saying, yeah, but Europe is too diverse, I'm always saying, go to India once, and then you see a country with 2,000 ethnies, 20 languages, 4 big religions, nevertheless, a democracy, and the biggest democracy worldwide. Don't underestimate, when you go to China, you are not entering a nation, you're entering a civilization. Han. And maybe you are too pressy towards all the others, but it's based on a civilization. We also have our common civilization. And we are ignoring it because we created, a little bit nationalism as the way to organize our continent. Well, it's not the best way to organize a continent in the world of tomorrow. So, thinking at that link, because I come back now to the mails that I received, I want to keep that. And we are scrutinizing, thinking, debating that, how we could achieve that. That an individual, UK citizens, would think that his links with Europe are not broken forever, as he doesn't want to.
Mr. Verhofstadt, just to follow up on one point, I've got 2 or 3 other questions already picked here, but if the UK government wanted to cherry-pick cooperation on counter-terrorism, is that an issue really for taxpayers and money, or is that something you'd welcome? Well,
what we are saying is that you have the whole economic membership withdrawal agreement, that's one thing. I'm gonna not explain you the 3 boxes and the way we're gonna negotiate this and on which I think there is more or less also more and more common understanding between the Union at the one hand and the UK at the other hand. But I think separately from this, there is the whole internal and external security issue. Okay. And I don't think it's a wise thing to do a trade-off between the one and the other. Yeah. That should be a mistake.
Right. This lady waiting there first, and then I'm coming here. Yep, please, microphone coming to you. Maybe we'll take 2 questions, if you don't mind, at a time, because that way I'll be quicker. One here. Yeah.
Kira Huyu from the University of Oxford. I was wondering, in the age of post-truth politics, alternative facts, all these things, and given the frankly astonishing disregard for factual accuracy on the side of Brexiteers in the referendum, what is the language in which you translate a whole, assuming that most citizens will not sit down and read the book, which is obviously unfortunate? How do you translate that book into the language of campaigning? Do you go and say, we are reclaiming facts? Or do you actually say, the only way for us to reclaim the narrative is to take a page from the book of populism and go in with emotive narratives? How do you campaign, as somebody who spends most of her waking hours trying to save Europe from itself? How do we talk to citizens?
Okay, we'll hold that thought for a second.
Could we go back in a few months ago then, before the referendum? That should be...
To have had the conversation before. Please, Baroness Nichols.
Baroness Nichols of Winterbourne, thank you so much for being here. How do you propose to restart the Constitution? No organisation can manage without a proper stalwart constitution inside it. I know that Britain does, but we have very, very ancient institutions, and alas, Brussels doesn't have that blessing. I wondered, it's not going to be possible to survive much longer without a constitution. And as we found with enlargement, the Helsinki process, as Mr. Gorbachev said to me at the time, if you let this get too big, it will collapse in the middle. Well, we are collapsing in the middle, and it's a great open door, for example, to corruption and to not honouring the agreements that are already part of the Union. Might it be possible to restart the constitution argument by starting with just the countries of the willing, for example, and let he who agrees join?
Yeah, that remembers me, in fact, what in America happened. In 1776, it started with the Confederation, then 9 wanted to go forward, 4 didn't want to go forward and didn't want to change the Confederation. Finally, they said, yeah, from now on, it's a new majority rule. And what is majority rule? Well, 9 on 13. If 9 on 13 agree, then it's okay. Mm-hmm. That's happened. It was that's Philadelphia. The 1785 second revolution, I should say. And finally, the four, and the latest who had to make trouble was Rhode Island, I remember. They all joined. So we are also in the same process, I think, inside the Union, in which we need to go forward with a vision, with a project. And I'm pretty sure of one thing, that at the end, every of the 27 will join this further building of, building again, I should say, of an effective and in my opinion, even less bureaucratic European Union, if we have the courage to do so. The problem today in Europe is that this vision, this project, is not there. How can you, and that's also my answer to the first question, how you can convince people if you don't have a clear direction of what the future will be, in which we can solve their problems, on which we can answer their challenges. It's not the ordinary citizens who will do that. It's not that citizens wake up in the morning and say, oh, I need more Europe. It doesn't work like that. It's the politicians who need to do that. And that is the narrative that I miss in the European Union as a whole, and that I missed also in the whole discussion on Brexit. If I may, one point of criticism to the Remain camp. It's a pity that they only talked about economy. And if every day, I can tell you, and every week you hear, oh, it will be a disaster, the Brexit. And then 2 days later, no, it will be a bigger disaster. No, and then 5 days later, it will be a huge disaster. And then so months and months about, nobody believes that it will be a disaster because you can repeat it so much times that the argument is not valid anymore. So I think, and then the other side on migration, I shall not repeat the scandalous posters that has been used by some in this campaign on migration, but I think the emotional argument, that counts. That is not sufficiently underlined also by our current European leaders now at this moment to explain why it is necessary to go forward with Europe. But I have to tell you, in the mails that I received from Europe, it's all about emotion. People, they say, we don't want to break away from something that makes part of our life and also part of our identity. Because identity, let's talk a little bit about identity. Identity and politics, it has never been a good marriage, I can tell you. It has always been abused. And identity of people is not one identity. Let not politicians categorize identity in saying, oh, you speak that language? Oh, you live in that neighborhood? Then that's your identity. That's nonsense. Everybody has a unique identity, and you decide on your identity, and let's certainly not the politicians take it away from you or abuse it, as it is happening now for the moment.
Thank you. Right. Lady there, and then at the front here. So, yep, there's Claudia, yep. And then right at the front, please.
Thank you. Claudia Hamill, member of Chatham House. I wanted to ask you, with the new president now of the European Parliament, and with the role that you're going to have in leading the Brexit negotiations for the Parliament, we were told that the Parliament will demand a greater role in this. Can you explain what the role is going to be now and what you would like it to be in the future, please?
Just hold that for us. So the role of the Parliament in the negotiation, and question at the front here, please, as well.
James Landell, BBC. Michel Barnier says that he wants the divorce talks to be completed before he starts the discussions about the future relationship. The British government takes a different view. Well, what is your view, and how big a hurdle do you think this whole question of scheduling will be before you can get on to issues of substance?
Easy answer, the treaty. The treaty gives it all. In the treaty, Article 50, they are saying a withdrawal can be agreed, taking into consideration the future relationship. So you see, that's a fantastic political text, and it says it's all. The withdrawal agreement in the light of the future relationship. That is literally the treaty, and that is what we need to apply.
So you're saying Article that second Article 50 should be applied. You can do both at the same time.
I say Article 50, and Article 50 is clear. It says a withdrawal taking into consideration the future relationship. That is what Article 50 is saying. And okay, let that to the negotiators a little bit of room of maneuver on Article 50. But that's the clear text. On the role of the Parliament. The role of the Parliament is very simple. We have to approve the outcome, the agreements that have been made. Withdrawal agreement, if there are other agreements on the future relationship or transitional measures, these agreements need to be approved by the Parliament. So we have the last word. And that's the reason why the Parliament is saying, and it could be that it is also put with, in these terms into the resolution we're going to adopt in a few months. We say then, okay, you need to have the Parliament on board from day one. Because it's a tricky moment, the moment when we have to agree or disagree with the outcome of the negotiations. Timetable is as follows. If we start by the end of May, beginning of June, the negotiations, take then 14 or 15 months, and then has to start the so-called consent procedure in the Parliament. Because we need to be ready before the European elections of 2019. So that means that the real time frame period for negotiation is around 15 months. And we start on the consent procedure in a quite sensitive moment. It is a few months before the European elections. You know how politicians are sensitive, I should say, in a period just before election. So it will be absolutely key that Parliament is taken on board from day one in these negotiations. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to have a green light at the end of the consent procedure. So that is our role in this. All agreements need to be approved by Parliament. If not, then there is simply no agreement, and there is an exit from Britain outside the Union without any arrangement.
Let's squeeze in two last questions. Lady right at the back, gentleman here. Yeah. So could you bring another microphone down to the front here? Just to be quick.
Thank you, sir. I'm Lynn O'Donnell from the Associated Press. You mentioned the flirtation in Europe with far-right nationalism as playing with fire, and you also made reference to the Muslim ban introduced a couple of days ago by the United States. Can you put the two together and expand maybe on what is the likely influence on the rise and spread of nationalism in Europe of the new populism in the United States? And you also mentioned new European leaders. Do they have the time to counter this impact before it takes a grip?
So
directly answering your question, I think that the populism and nationalism by Trump is more influenced by our right-wing and populist movements than the opposite. And I think there is a lot of proof of that. It's the opposite than what many people think. It's from here that it went the other side of the Atlantic and not the opposite.
So, here.
My name is Melle Garsdag, and I'm a journalist for Dutch newspaper NRC Handelsblad. And my question is, the EU will see these negotiations as being about the UK's exit from the European Union. But if you listen to people in London, they also talk about the UK's commitments to NATO. Someone today told me it is the elephant in the room. How do you react to that? And how do you, I assume from your point of view, prevent these negotiations from being more than just the UK's exit from the EU?
I said it already, but maybe not clear enough that for me it's not only about economics and about agreements on that. There will be also on the table the whole question of internal and external security. But what you already see in Europe, that is that the idea of the European Defence Union is again on the table since the Brexit referendum. And I'm pleased with that. I organized once as Prime Minister a so-called, well, they called it, the journalist, a chocolate summit, because naturally we are specialists in chocolate, so it was in Brussels. And at that moment on the table were European headquarters, common procurement of military equipment. All these ideas where people were laughing with in 2003, 2004 are now back on the table. And that's not an issue NATO or European defense. That's a totally wrong question. European defense is absolutely key also for NATO, for the North Atlantic Alliance. We have to start to thinking about a North Atlantic Alliance not as an alliance of a number of individual member states, nations, but as an alliance of pillars. And that's the only way in Europe to have a more effective contribution to NATO. Because let's not be naive. I don't see any room of maneuver in the coming years in Europe to increase in national budget the military expenditures. What I see is the possibility to create a defense union that spends 42% of the American expenditure and is capable not to do 12% of operation, but maybe double or the triple of that. And that should be an enormous achievement. And that's also a reason why it is a complete mistake by the American president now to bid on a further disintegration of the Union. That's weakening the security interest of the West, of America, and of Europe. Instead, he should bid on a strengthening and a further integration, also on defense of the Union.
Did you appreciate Theresa May making that point to President Trump, where she talked about the importance of a strong Europe?
It seems to me the only thing that was still on the table on which they were agreeing, so it was good, well done by her to pick it and say, yeah, we have NATO.
Look, I'm afraid we've gone over time already, and I had a lot of hands waiting, so I must apologize to folks, but we said an hour, and we've gone a bit over now as it is. I think, Mr. Verhofstadt, and on behalf of Chatham House, of Liberal International, Dr. Minovis, I'm sure the ban will be lifted at some point, and those books will be allowed out. But thank you very much. Europe's last chance was what you were talking about here. As you said, Brexit perhaps provides an opportunity for a focus more on a different type of European integration. We appreciate you taking the time to come and share your thoughts here. Please, a very strong hand for Mr. Verhofstadt.